Ahoj, tak všichni online?
Jo.
Taky.
A ty, babi?
Babi,
musíš tam na to kliknout. Ne na to
babi,
druhý.
musíš tam na tu ikonku.
Sluchátko, babi.
Jeden svět, festival dokumentárních filmů o lidských právech. 10. května až 6. června jedensvět.cz. Pořádá Člověk v tísni.
Dobrý večer, vážení diváci a diváčky.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stepan Sedláček, and welcome to the debate, which is organized as part of the 23rd edition of One World Documentary Film Festival, organized by People in Need.
Mnozí z vás právě
Many of you have just seen the film Taming the Garden,
a já jsem velice rád, že
and I'm very happy to welcome here
hosta naší debaty,
our guest,
kterým je
who is
režisérka
Salome
tohoto filmu,
Joshi,
paní Salome Joshi.
the director of the film.
Dobrý večer.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Než se pustíme do debaty, tak ještě bych vás
Before we start discussing, I would
své
like to
otázky.
tell you about the ways of asking your questions. You can use the Slido application, and you are probably already seeing a QR code. And otherwise, you can use YouTube or Facebook comments.
Dříve než nám pošlete,
Before you start sending your questions, I would like to open the debate myself.
Paní Joshi,
Salome,
ten snímek popisuje tu situaci,
your film
kdy
shows a situation
jakýsi tajemný
where there is a mysterious man who isn't shown directly in the film, but who collects trees from all over Georgia. And I wonder, how many trees has he collected?
Well, until now, he has collected a total of more or less 200 trees.
Přes 200 stromů a
okay, more than 200. And do you know how many people refused to give him permission to sell their trees to be transported to his garden?
How many people refused? Yeah, as far as I know, two households refused to sell their trees.
Ten snímek sleduje
Your film
složitou
looks at a very difficult transportation of the trees.
Náročný proces,
You
který
show it
trvá
in much
docela
detail.
dlouho.
It takes a long time, obviously. And
cestu
can you tell
nepřežilo, že
how many
se
trees
potom
didn't
neujali
really
po tom
survive this
přesazení?
transportation?
Yeah, so if we go into statistics here from the beginning of the Q&A, so I cannot tell you exactly how many did not survive. The last time I was there, I think around four had not survived.
Tím sběratelem je
Okay. This collector is actually a Georgian billionaire and former PM, Bidzina Ivanishvili. Could you maybe introduce him for the Czech audience? Can you give us some explanations about his long-lasting interest in trees?
Well, Bidzina Ivanishvili was an anonymous person until 2011. I mean, in this country, we all knew that this kind of person existed, and that he would fund theaters, or he would fund various things. So, and he had his prominent, huge palace, which was called a business palace, on top of the hill in the central part of Tbilisi. And nobody had even seen his photograph, not to even speak about the video or interview. But in 2011, he decided to come to the politics because he was unhappy with the previous government. He formed a political party, Georgian Dream, and he became the prime minister of Georgia for 1 year. Then he stepped down from the position of prime minister, saying that, kind of arguing that he had achieved his goal to bring his political party, his people to the power, and then he had just there was time for him to already step down, and then he remained to be the leader of the political party, the Georgian Dream, until January this year. So by the time he was transporting, by the time he developed this hobby of gathering, of accumulating the trees, he was the leader of the political party. And it's not the trees that he's interested in only. He's interested in collecting different kinds of animals. There was a big talk about him collecting penguins and exquisite animals like albino peacock, for example, or zebras. It was a widely spoken story. So trees is kind of one of his, and he's also an avid art collector. So trees is just one of his collecting, one of his passions.
Ono v tom snímku vlastně vystupuje jako takový strůjce v pozadí.
He is this person behind the scenes.
Jaký má ten jeho zájem.
And you are actually observing the impact of his hobby. The impact on individuals' lives. From what you're saying, I understand that it is not easy to approach him, to get into contact with him. Did you try actually to speak to him for the purpose of your documentary, or did you actually want to show the other side?
I mean, my aim was not really to include him in the film. I mean, at some point, I considered him. I spoke to the mediators. But finally, it was quite clear for me that it would have been better if he had remained as this omnipresent, godlike figure who you never see, but who's always there determining the course of events. So it was kind of an artistic decision not to have him in the film. It was not important anyway to have him with his face and body there.
Nakonec v tom snímku ale diváci vidí ten výsledek,
in your documentary,
park, který
the viewers can see this park, which can be compared to an attempt at a divine garden with all those ancient trees. Was it difficult to get access to this park? Is it accessible to public?
So the park is not currently because of the virus, but in this summer, for example, it was accessible for the public. So officially, it is called a dendrological park, which can be open to the public. It is owned by a private person, Bidzina Ivanishvili and his family. So yeah, right now it is accessible. But by the time we were filming, we did not have access to it most of the time. During the time of the construction, but slowly, as we were filming for about 2 years, and we developed very close contact with the people working there, and it kind of made sense to also film in the park. So there were a couple mediators who mediated with Bidzina Ivanishvili, and he finally agreed that we film in the park, which is basically completed, which was completed by the time. Mostly completed. But speaking of the access, just to continue a little bit, because it's a question that I'm very often asked. So in the beginning, we did not really, it's two things about the access. One is that most of these trees are taken from public spaces, or the spaces where you can see from public space. So, we did not really need access in certain locations, but of course in certain locations or on crucial times of transportation, we needed this permission. And we together with my researcher, we developed a web of contacts and with whom we worked for all these months. And then at some point, I think that the engineers themselves also realized, if I can say so, that what they do is very unique. Okay, they look at it as from the engineering side. So nobody has ever done something like they were doing. So they were really proud of it, and I can totally understand it was a very, very unique engineering project. So I think they also had their interest for us to film what they were doing. Of course, I was looking for something else there, not just the engineering part, but for them, it was like a millennium project that deserved to be documented.
Ono v tom snímku je vidět, že lidé, kterým ty stromy patřily,
the owners of the trees receive compensations in return, quite significant sums of money. But when the tree is uprooted, there remains a landscape that is scarred, that is partly destroyed. So what actually were the compensations received by these owners? Did they have to actually reconstruct the sites themselves?
So the sites were reconstructed by the workers. So the earth was put back, but I mean, if it was public space, the workers, the people of Byzina Ivanishvili would plant the bushes or the small trees or plants there. If it was a yard, they would just put down the earth, and then the owners had to kind of rebuild it, make it green again. And the compensations, they vary. It was really, it was really different. It depended. It could have been like a couple thousands or to tens of thousands. It depended on the kind of tree, on the location, on the people, but also it depended on the level of bargaining, I think, and on the level of how much these people were in need of the money.
Interesting. I have received some questions from the audience. Your film is visually really intriguing. Could you screen it on a big screen in spite of the pandemic?
Yeah, there was so far one occasion to screen it on a big screen, which was in the Lincoln Center. I mean, the film was made for the big screen. And there are many night scenes, for example, that are really hard to watch on the laptop, and they really need to be watched in the cinema, or the kind of images that we have, they deserve a cinema. But yeah, so far it was only in the Lincoln Center. Tomorrow it's screened at Docs Barcelona in a cinema. It will be screened in cinema on Canary Islands next week, and also in Vienna. So that's still like near, and then at Berlinale Special, it will be screened in June, on a big screen, the open air cinema.
Okay. Another question. Why did you opt for the form of a so-called artistic documentary? Didn't you want to talk to the sellers of the trees?
Yes, well, that's a good question, an intriguing question. I mean, this was the kind of topic out of which many different films could come out. It could take really many different directions, not just in editing, but also when we were filming. Like we could have made a factual film, an investigative film, I don't know, like film about one owner, whatever. Like really, that was a challenging project for me to understand where I wanted to go. But for me, it was quite clear from the beginning that I don't want to concentrate. I don't want a clear protagonist there as a human being. The protagonist is the tree and the man who has the desire to take them, to have the big trees. So going closer to certain people would, for me, shift the attention from this desire, from the center, from what I wanted to tell. It would have a different accent. But I mean, on the other hand, in the film, there are some sellers who appear. But yes, it was in a way deliberate that we didn't go too close to them. But also, it was not just deliberate. It was not easy to get access to the people selling the trees, because trees here in Georgia, they spoke about politics. And when you speak about politics here, where the democracy is extremely fragile, it can be dangerous. So people, I mean, we got numerous refusals to be filmed because people were afraid to lose their jobs. They were afraid that their relative would lose their job, that they would have a problem in their community. So, I mean, people that we have in the film, it's like, wow, like it's an exception. That so many stories stayed behind the fences because every time we would come up with it, most times we would be there with a camera, they would just run away, or even with a recorder, just even to record the sound. So yeah, people were very reluctant to appear honestly in front of the camera.
Mimochodem, víte, jak...
By the way, do you know, or could you tell us about the choice of the trees? Who found those trees?
Yeah, so it was a kind of a system. In the beginning, it was scouting. So there were certain people who were scouting for Bidzina Ivanishvili, like locals who had close contact with him. And then after some time, there were also people themselves, the owners of the trees, would send, would find out the contact of the mediators, would call them, would send them pictures. So yeah, and then, everybody knew about this project. So everybody who had not everybody, but most people who had a tree, like they thought it's a treasure now in my yard now, which I can convert in real dollars. So yeah, it would, they would just try to it's a small country, and especially in regions, it's like everybody knows each other. So they would try to find out who I can contact to sell my tree. Yeah, and then Bidzina Ivanishvili would, in most cases, visit the tree by himself before confirming the transportation.
Okay, interesting.
Další dotaz, který na to navazuje.
Another question from the audience. Does Ivanishvili or do other people, do the owners, the original owners, visit the trees after they're transported?
Well, yes, I suppose so. I haven't heard from all of them, sure, but I know one of them sent me a picture and said, "Oh, it looks good here," and yeah, I received the feedback from one of them.
All right.
Řekla byste, že stromy
v Gruzii that trees have a special meaning, a special role in the Georgian culture?
I think as in every culture, I don't think it's just cultural, but culturally, I mean, there are trees. A tree appears in kind of mythology, in Georgian mythology, like a Georgian version, so to say, of Prometheus, when Amirani, who is the Georgian prototype of Prometheus, kind of confronts the god, and the god makes the stick into a tree, and Amirani is supposed to pull it up, but he cannot pull it up because it has roots all over, and then he's changed it to this tree. So the tree appears in mythology. However, the tree also has a different meaning, which also it has, I think, all over the world. It speaks about life, and very often in a village, a house, in the yard of a village house, you find an old tree, which is a place for gathering, which is a place for shade, which is a place for conversation or for dinners, Also in my country house, where I would go all summers with my grandmother and with my cousins, we would have this gathering under a large walnut tree, and it was like an icon, So in that sense, the tree speaks about like stability, stability, history, like family, security. So yeah, in that sense, it does have meaning, of course.
Let us look at another question from the audience. Thank you for the film. What are your feelings about this situation in your country? Did you want to reflect your feelings in the film or be just a neutral observer?
It's a good question. I don't think you can be neutral when you make a film, even if you're making like unbiased news reporting, still you cannot be neutral. And I don't think I'm neutral in the film. However, what was my purpose and our purpose with the editor probably was to keep a distance and not to indicate very clearly our position, or not to indicate very clearly what one should think about this process, to leave a kind of a space for the audience to, by themselves, acquire a position about what was going on. And for me, it was a very clear choice, very clear artistic choice, if I can say so, Because I think when you see a process like that, you do have an opinion. I don't think it's possible for you to just say, yeah, it's fantastic, it's great, or just to say, oh, it's horrible, because it's neither black nor white. It's not in the middle. Of course, critical thinking while observing this process is very important. But it was really my intention to leave it up to the audience, to leave it up for them to develop their own thought about it.
Yes, that is the topic of another question we received. Have you screened the film in Georgia? What reactions did you have or are you expecting to have?
The film was screened in Georgia for a very, very small audience because the cinemas are not yet open and the festival here has not happened yet. So it was screened to a couple protagonists, no, not protagonists, but those who participated in the film, who gave us permission to film. I was very nervous about the reaction, of course, because it was the people that trusted me and that I trusted, and it was interesting to see how they would accept the film. They were upset that the film did not include more engineering works, like not more process, because the process has much more details going on. So it was the only thing that he was not comfortable about. But in terms of political part of it, even without screening, I received some criticism about the title of the film, because they consider it the political party. The politically biased people, they consider it's a biased title. Taming, it's biased. And they were upset that in the synopsis it says that it's a private garden. They said, oh, it's for public, it's a public park. Well, it's a private park, private garden that was created with the passion of one man, because of the desire of one man. And even if he sometimes opens the gates for the public, it doesn't mean it's a public park, right? But yeah, even officially in official media, there were these comments by the supporters of Bydzina Ivanishvili criticizing me for saying that it's a private park. Yeah.
Po té zkušenosti natáčení, když se díváte na
after the experience of the shooting and when you're watching the resulting film, are you happy with, or do you think the intention of Ivanishvili was successfully implemented? Hundreds of trees were transported to one place, but there are questions that arise, of course. What do you think this says about the Georgian society today?
Well, this is not an easy question, because of course I cannot generalize what was happening there and say that because of what happened, this is how the Georgian society looks. But of course I can make some conclusions, and I think you as the audience can also make the conclusion. One conclusion is that unfortunately the gap between the wealthy and the poor is extremely large. And people who were selling their trees, they were selling them, and some of them were selling them because they were fed up with the large tree, with its falling leaves and kind of shading their garden. But most of them were selling their trees because they needed money to treat their relative for cancer, or to give education to their children, like to fulfill basic needs. So this is when you observe, and it's kind of crazy that some person can have such wealth to kind of change the nature, and others don't have basic, their basic needs are not fulfilled. I think this is the main kind of observation or conclusion that I can say about the Georgian society coming out from the film.
A co pro vás osobně byl
For you personally, what was maybe the strongest moment during the shooting? Maybe it isn't even included in the film, but what was your strong moment full of emotion?
Yeah, and if I can continue just the previous question, because I think it's important, and then I will reply to this one. What I also observed was that a man who is powerful can basically do anything, which can also be illegal. Like, for example, cutting down other trees that would stand on the way. It's usually illegal to cut down a tree here. It's really complicated to cut down a tree in this country. But for him, every exception was made. Like, large electricity cables were taken down at night. Even like, you know, in the international cable that takes electricity from Georgia to Turkey was cut down for a moment so that the tree could pass. You know, like, I would never achieve this, or no one would ever achieve this except for one man. So this inequality was not just in terms of wealth, but also in terms of power, was very clear. So as to the strongest moment in the film, it's hard to say. There were several moments which were quite overwhelming and either joyous or difficult. One difficult moment for me personally was that we were filming, and it's part of the film, one street where an oak is supposed to pass. And for several days, the trees were being cut down on the way. And on the way, there was this very beautiful tree, which is actually not a very common tree here. It's quite rare, and it grows very slowly. So it was rather small. It was rather small. I don't remember the name of the type of this tree, but anyway, it looked really beautiful. And the locals, they called it a flower. They said it's not a tree, it's a flower, because when it blooms, it's really like a flower. It's not a tree. And there were talks that they would uproot this tree and take it somewhere else and then plant it back or whatever. But they cut down this tree, and I think for me this was one of the like emotional moments, and it was also close to the end of filming, so I had accumulated all these emotions. So that was one of the difficult ones. Another difficult moment was probably a scene that did not go into the film. In Zanzibar, they wanted to bring. There was an intention to bring a baobab. A large baobab from Zanzibar. So we went there to film this process, but they didn't uproot it. They just cut the branches of this huge baobab so that it would fit somewhere anyway. And for me, this was also an extremely emotional moment, because you don't cut branches of like 1,000-year-old tree just like that, you know. It should not happen. It's like a world cultural heritage. You don't do this to such a heritage in a village, you know, to a tree which is owned by a village where like locals just in a way worship this tree. It's a really important pillar for them. And then the tree was not even taken, and so it stayed like that. So for me, that was another very emotional part of filming.
Okay, and maybe the very last question we received from the audience.
Máte nějaký svůj oblíbený strom?
Do you have a favorite tree, and why?
V závorce kromě zmíněného ořešáku.
Maybe except the mentioned walnut tree.
Yes, I have one favorite tree. I don't know the name in English. I should look it up. But it's small. It's not big. So it's small, and it looks different from everything else. But the way it was placed in the park is really swallowed by other trees. Yeah, so I will check the name of it. And maybe you can know as well. 1 second. It's aspen tree. I don't know how it is in Czech.
Tak.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Říká Salome Joshi.
This was Salome Joshi, the director of Taming the Garden. Do you want to add some final points after this debate?
No, I'm very happy that my film was screened at One World because actually I don't know, most of my films have been presented at One World, and for me it's a very familiar, very close. It's the festival that is very close to my heart. And I was really hopeful I could also come to Prague, but unfortunately it is not possible. But I hope that's another time.
And we are very happy for having you here with us, at least on the screen. And thanks a lot for your answers. And maybe see you during another year's edition with another movie.
Tímto bych také rád poděkoval
Finally, I would like to
institutu v Praze,
thank
který
to
podpořil
Goethe Institute in Prague, which supported today's screening, and I would like to thank you, to the audience, for your questions, for your involvement, and please watch the award ceremony, which will follow this debate. It will start at 8 p.m.
Už od zítřka budou první projekce v kinech, respektive
at 8:30, and this part of the festival will be followed by live screenings, outdoor screenings.